uh, projects and research that I do and that I've done in the past. So the kind of frame that I'd like to use this afternoon with all of you is to give an introduction to myself and my background and skills and the things that I help people with. Then find out a little bit more about each of you. And then after we do that, I'll talk about the different software tools that you have available to you and some of the issues that you might encounter in the course of doing your projects. And then different ways in which to find data and bring the data that you might be interested in into your projects. But also some of the methods that can be used with ArcGIS in order to share your projects out to a wider community. And one of the other parts of that is showing you all the different tools that are available with the S3 software licenses. Many of the things that you might be interested in, you can do with open source and other tools, but sometimes the real goal is to get your projects up and running as quickly as you can, and then to go back and refine them and improve them using different tools available to you. So, so to start, let me give you a little bit of an introduction to me, and then I'll get some introductions from you. The first thing I'm going to do is share my screen with a PowerPoint that I have. And hopefully this will work properly. There we go. So we're not actually meeting in person at the Graduate School of Design, but this is a picture I took last year of the outside of the school. The light was shining on it in a really interesting way, so I like to use it as a backdrop. I am a geographer. I'm all but dissertation in geography from Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. I decided at some point 20 years ago to walk away from my PhD and do some other stuff. I'm a cartographer, I'm a data analyst, problem solver, map geek, information junkie, and kind of an accidental librarian. I'll point out a couple of things. I like to share these two pictures because I think they represent kind of my exploratory and experimental nature. So the first one is getting stuck on a traversal or a street in the Trans-Amazon. And, you know, got through that experience. It was a lot of fun. It was really interesting. The lower picture is me training a whole bunch of local assistants in how to use standalone GPS devices 20 years ago. Nowadays, most of us would probably just use cell phones with cell phone apps and different tools, a few of which I'll introduce to you in a little bit. But back then you actually had to get standalone GPS devices and train locals if it was a big enough research project and how to use those tools to go out and do household community surveys on farms there. When I first started doing GIS, it looked a little bit more like what's going on in this table here. It looks a lot like a drafting table, but it's a light table where the guy has a puck that he's using to hand digitize probably a USGS topo map. The first system that I worked on looked a lot like that. That was probably in 1988 or 89. So I've been doing geographic information systems for about 30 years. And the first map I did was a map of Tanzania where we just needed the water courses so that we could map out water resources in the country. And that actually took us the whole semester to create that map in a digital format from hand or cartographically available resources. Now you can just go to a whole bunch of different resources online, download that data and create that map in the representation you're looking at right there. I probably created in under 5 minutes, including downloading the data. So it's the whole country with provincial boundaries and then major river courses and water bodies in the country from a resource called GIS. One of the projects that I worked on early on was looking at riverboat gambling in Philadelphia. And that was actually for Councilman Nutter, who then became the mayor of the city. And as you can see there, it's a really simple map with just some planning information and highlighting different locations. And it was a team of graduate students that did that. It's not a really complicated process. Nowadays, I can go and get all of that zoning information for any of most large cities in the US and could have even created an online map that other people can explore and put other resources. But it was good, quick visualization to do at the time. I've done some economic analysis of India in my master's program, and we had to hand digitize this whole map of India. And digitize all the districts and then get a database built and put in values for all of that information there. It was a fun project. I learned a lot. Nowadays, you wouldn't have to do most of the work that we had to do for that. Did some work with folks in Nepal and back to more Amazon work. And one of the things to think about when generating maps, and that's why I clicked through really quickly to this one, is there may be a lot of information that you want to display, but you also have to think about the audiences that you're producing your cartographic product for. And your cartographic product isn't necessarily just a 2D representation that's going to go into a book that's going to have a 5-inch wide map in it. It may actually be a dynamic map that's going to go on a web page. But you still need to think about some of those ways in which you're representing the information of interest to you. And so we knew we didn't have the funding to publish a whole bunch of really high quality color images. So we tried to put a lot of information into one grayscale map in this particular case. I won't go into the details on that, but worth showing. When I left graduate school, I ended up working in the nonprofit sector for a while. And one of the places that I worked at was called the Providence Plan in Providence, Rhode Island. I did a lot of the incident mapping for them for crimes and other types of stuff in the city. But we also did all kinds of other economic analysis and mapping, including foreclosure map that you can see there. That was during the foreclosure crisis in the early or mid-aughts. Really kind of hit Providence very hard. Then some medical mapping. I became an accidental librarian in 2012 when it looked like they needed somebody that did geographic information systems and mapping, but also had a lot of skills with social sciences data, census data, demographic data, all of that kind of thing. So I ended up working for the Brown Library, helping mostly graduate students on projects where they wanted to create maps to support their masters and theses and dissertations. This map right here I like a lot because it's an example of something called a small multiple, where you take a whole bunch of small maps that each represent one or two things well, and then you can use it either for time series or dividing up other data that you're interested in representing, including poverty, for instance, or ethnicity or race, general population. Amanda Boston ended up doing a dissertation out of some of this stuff and turned out to be a really great piece of work. Farmland by county with Black farmers in 2007. This is from the agricultural census. I was working with a faculty member at Brown who was very interested in Black women farmers in both the US and Brazil. So this was a quick exploration for her. But sometimes the maps that we're interested in producing may have a global kind of sphere that we're interested in looking at. This was just a representation of relationships between the Brown University Library at the time and other international libraries. So again, different ways to represent information. This one here was me helping out some medical school people looking at different varieties of HIV in Providence, and there are 2 distinct strains in the city at the time. Turned into a publication I got a co-authorship on. So that was kind of cool. And then sometimes you do other things with the maps. And this is an example of me working with a student at in the Brown RISD's cross-disciplinary undergraduate degree program, very bright student. But I've also done very similar projects with a lot of students at the GSD since I've been at Harvard. So there are many different ways in which we might use this kind of data, and including sometimes creating 3D prints that represent multiple types of data. So I wanted to kind of give that background and let you know kind of the sphere of work that I've done. I've also done a whole bunch of other stuff that I didn't put some excellent examples in for, but I've been helping a lot of students here at the Graduate School of Design with story maps. I did some of that at Brown University as well, because I work with a lot of people doing something called digital humanities projects. And digital humanities and design projects often actually have a lot of overlap with regard to the types of spatial representations people are interested in doing. So that's part of why I think my name ended up being out there as one of the people that might be worthwhile to provide a GIS workshop for you. Because hopefully what I can do is get you jump started on using the GIS tools, but also get to the point where you're using those tools to create online and dynamic things that exist on the internet, whether or not they are dashboards or maps with narrative structure wrapped around them. So there are a couple of different ways that we can do that. Anybody have any questions for me or thoughts? So what I'm hoping next is now that I've introduced myself, maybe each of you could say a little bit about yourselves and the work you're doing. And maybe one other piece to that would be whether or not you've thought about the geospatial thing that you're interested in creating, whether or not you want to create some kind of a dashboard or a story map or a series of cartographic products that are representative of the type of issues that you're concerned with. And so that would be great to hear that. I've got some of your background. I've seen your bios. I've got a list of all of you and know a little bit about what you're doing, but it's great to hear from people in person as well. How about we start with Laura, since your video is on?
Sure. Hello. I love your background and the accidental librarian. I've always thought that maybe there's another version of myself out there that's a librarian, so that makes me a little jealous. So I'm a landscape designer, and my project area is focusing on the Prince George's County public school system, and so all of the school sites. And I'd like to create a dashboard, so it's very much geospatial, that shows the social, economic, and environmental benefits of climate resilient landscapes on the school properties. So, you know, I've kind of got a lot of ideas up there and like understand a lot of current tools that are out there, but I'm not entirely certain of how to apply it to the exact, I guess, application that I'm thinking. I do have a decent amount of experience with GIS. I usually use desktop, but it's usually and I've gotten into like databasing some, but I've never really worked with like in a dashboard sense where things are, you can manipulate and, you know, I guess mess around with things. So I definitely would like to see what can be done in that regard. But I think some of the things that might be hard for my project are understanding like how site specific I need to get, and then thinking about accuracy, because I know there's going to be a lot of like calculations involved. So that's kind of where I'm looking at, because it's probably around like 255 sites, which is a lot for, I don't know, depending on like the scope and everything. So and that's kind of where I am.
Excellent. Good to hear. Yeah. And apologies in the background. My sister's dogs are stirred up by something. I was just going to say, I have worked with some other students on projects where they're identifying school sites and using them in projects. Usually not quite that many schools, but there are ways that we can manage that and different places to get all the appropriate data, I think. So just because you're thinking big doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna, I still think you'll be able to do your projects to a large degree. So it's good to hear some of those details. Anybody interested in volunteering to go next?
I can go next. Hi, my name is Idalmis. I'm a little sick, so please excuse my weird voice. But I work with an organization called Communities for a Better Environment and we're a statewide organization that works with and organizes EJ communities. And one of the things that I work on is hazardous waste regulation and working with our agency that is supposed to like permit and regulate these sites. And so my project, been working with Jill, Nathan, and Jonathan to create a map of the hazardous waste facilities in California and how they are overlaying that information on top of our environmental justice mapping tool, CalEnviroScreen, to kind of, and CalEnviroScreen kind of gives you an idea of the EJ communities throughout the state. And so I think the idea behind that is kind of showing and seeing whether they're like, of course, we know, and by like virtue of working and living in EJ communities, that a lot of these hazardous waste sites are located and disproportionately located in EJ communities, but having that like information and map behind it would really help our advocacy. And so I've been working with them to create that. So we had something similar at my organization, but it was like, it's been outdated. It was from the 90s. And so I think that map, having an updated map will be really important and helpful. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, it's one of the interesting things I've encountered over the past couple of years, especially with some of the older master's students who have been out working at firms or have worked for nonprofits, and they've worked with some of the tools that existed 10 years ago, and many 10 or 15 years ago, and many aren't aware of some of the newer things that you can do really quickly, especially with all the software as a service tools that Esri now has, but also with some of the things like OpenStreetMap and with the tools that Google makes available. So hopefully a few of the things that I'll show you this afternoon, they might look like tips and tricks, but they may actually be excellent solutions for some of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think we've been trying to figure out like how to best articulate this data, because we can have like a map of all the individual sites or we can create like a hot map or a heat map, right?
Yeah.
Show density. Yeah, but also, I mean, I think I'm like primarily interested in kind of like hearing from you, like what are the best, or what are the other options out there.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, any
Sounds good.
recommendations on that?
Excellent. Let's go with Jay next.
Hi, Jay Brannon. So I work as a civil engineer in water resources, but volunteer with the Portland NAACP Environmental Justice Committee, and some other places. And what I'm hoping to make is a dashboard, but I also like the idea of story maps. I use them for sewer rehabilitation projects, and I think they're a great way to show data with stories of community, because as I think I talked about, we had this urban heat dome in Portland, and I want to show the correlation between our tree canopy, where frontline communities are located. We already know it's exactly what you'd expect. It's with our Black, brown, and low income folks where there's the most hotter places with less trees. But I want to also incorporate stories of community who were there. Like I have access to little anecdotes and stories about, like, if you were to hover on the map, you could see, yes, we lived in this apartment and we didn't have air conditioning. Our landlord wouldn't allow us, and things like that, just to make the data more human and accessible. So maybe there's a way to do the story maps in a dashboard. I don't know how to do that. I use GIS to look at sewer pipes and water pipes and things, but I don't make maps with it.
And you can embed Esri's dashboards in a story map. I'm not quite sure if you can do the reverse, but that one way might work for you as an option.
Okay.
And I'll definitely so I'm going to use a bunch of today to introduce you to a whole suite of stuff and resources. I might not go in enough detail to actually get you from the beginning of your problem to the solution, but I'm gonna direct you in what way to go, I think. Yeah.
Thanks.
So Sophie?
I think Sophie and Diana are part of the
That's
the
right.
team. So
Yeah.
I think you can go ahead. The other fellows were recording, so
Yes,
I'll
excellent.
benefit from that.
Sounds good. So it is really helpful to actually hear what each of you are working on and kind of think a little bit more deeply about some of the problems that you might be encountering with what you're doing. And then to think about the ways in which we might use the geographic information system tools that are available to you via Harvard. And what might be available to you outside of Harvard when you're done with your fellows. So a quick logistical question for those of you who are here with me this afternoon. How many of you were able to install ArcGIS Pro and get it working on your laptops or desktops?
I have no room on my laptop, so I actually have something new coming on Thursday that I'll be able to download it.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't get my ID till this morning, so I haven't been able to download it yet, but I do know how to use it. So
Okay.
like, yeah.
And Idlemas? Okay.
Sorry, what was it?
Were you able to install ArcGIS Pro?
No, I haven't. Sorry.
Okay. Worthwhile to ask. Yeah.
Bruce, I'll also cut in. I had I can turn my camera on. I had a fellow message me who wasn't able to come today. And she has a Mac. And so I was wondering if you had suggestions on Bootcamp, Parallel, QGIS. I don't know what her project is exactly, but I know it's not easy.
Yeah.
I have a Mac too.
So ArcGIS Pro isn't going to work on a Mac. You have to have a Windows environment available to you. And if you have a Mac that has an Intel processor on it, you can use Bootcamp or Parallels or VMware and set up windows on that machine to run it. That is not super ideal. I actually have a Mac that I run ArcGIS Pro on, but it's like the last of the Intel Macs, and it's got a lot of memory and a lot of hard drive space. But into the future, ArcGIS Pro won't run on Macs at all if they have an M1 or an M2 processor. So you would need to find a way to access a Windows environment where you can install it. There are a couple of other caveats to that, though. There are a lot of really excellent tools that you can use via Esri's software as a service stuff that's all in ArcGIS Online, and some of that is what I'm going to show you this afternoon. And that's where you can do the Esri story maps and the Esri dashboards and use ArcGIS Online to create maps and actually even do some analysis. So some of the stuff is possible to do using the online tools. The other thing I'll mention about that, QGIS is really excellent. It's open source software that works on Macs and PCs and Linux machines. It can do a lot of what the Esri software can, but it doesn't have access to some of the software as a service kind of tools in the same way. For doing kind of excellent one-off cartographic products, it's actually pretty good. But if you want to do the more dynamic online stuff, then you may still want to go with the Esri tools. So there are multiple solutions out there. I was going to focus a little bit more on what the Esri tools make available for you, but for those of you who are dependent on other hardware, we can probably figure out appropriate solutions for you. So very good question, and feel free. I'm technically on vacation this week, but feel free to reach out to me and one-on-one, and we can see if we can come up with some solutions for you. Yeah. The next thing I wanted to say is that I provided a PDF, 2 different PDF handouts for you that have a lot of the information that I share with people in workshops. One of them is my geospatial research strategies that has the URL links to a whole bunch of different resources. Some of them are general library resources, and actually I'll show you that page there just a second. This first link is just my library page. The second link is all the GIS resources that I share through the GSD, and many of those links might be worth it for you to explore. There is software assistance that I provide that's for Esri products, QGIS, Google Maps, and other online geospatial tools. There are a whole bunch of different resources that you have access to via Harvard, the Harvard University Library mapping and GIS support. gis.harvard.edu is the Center for Geographic Analysis, and that's where you can actually download the Esri software and set up your Esri license. So I definitely encourage all of you to take a look at that site and the information that's there. It's also the spot that has the information on getting your, let me click on this and go into services and software. And if you go here, you'll see ArcGIS Pro listed. It gives you all of the instructions for creating your ArcGIS Online account and logging in and then getting the software. I do, for the few of you that have actually gone ahead to get the software, I will mention that Esri did something really interesting this week. They released the version 3 of their software. And so that will maybe look and operate just a little bit different than the current version, but I'm going to show you some stuff with ArcGIS Pro this afternoon. So it's good to know about that help there. Oh, one other thing I want to mention with the Center for Geographic Analysis. So I'm the person at the Graduate School of Design that can often help people with GIS questions and problems. But the Center for Geographic Analysis actually maintains the software licenses for all the Esri software. And if you need help from them, you can just hit this contact us button there and fill that form out and submit your question. They will give up to an hour of consultation for free, but after that, they start charging. So often it's probably better for you to reach out to me first, and I'll see if I can help you out with any questions or issues that you run into. So I want you to know about that, and the some of the other links that are on that handout are some of the other social sciences resources that Harvard has, as well as a whole bunch of resources that are available online for getting general data. And that world data, this is important for me to mention to you because some of this data that's available in these links might actually be really useful for some of your projects. And maybe even initially for some of your cartographic production. But then there's also USGS Earth Explorer, which is all of the USGS data that anybody in the US can access and bring into their projects. And then some of the historical mapping information, which is very useful. So all of those are worth taking a look at. The other handout I gave you is was kind of my introduction materials, but also kind of the general approach to my teaching introduction to GIS classes and an overview of resources that you might be interested in. So we just took a look at the Harvard CGA site and where to get that ArcGIS key. But one of the things that's really important for you in the GIS software is that once you set up the account so that you can access, so that you can get ArcGIS Pro to work for you on your desktop, you're also creating something called an ArcGIS Online account. And when you create that account, you end up getting access to the ArcGIS Online page, and I'll show you what that looks like. It's an ArcGIS Online account, which you end up getting, and you have your profile information and my Esri. You can actually get access to some of the additional software there. When you sign into that, sometimes when people create their accounts to get access to ArcGIS Pro, they don't realize they're getting all kinds of other services and software that are available to them. So if you take a look, there's actually a home on the left-hand side. The navigation gets a little bit difficult sometimes. There's galleries of the work that are available. There's creating a general map. There's creating a scene, so creating 3D scenes with your maps. Not everybody has access to the notebooks, but the notebooks actually give access to a Jupyter notebook style approach for working with data and then mapping. I'm not going to go into that in any deep extent at the moment, but a few of you might be interested in that. And then the groups and the organizations. I actually just created a group which I can eventually add all the fellows to, which would be a way for you to share your data and your projects with each other if you're interested in doing some collaborative development. One of the things that I find with geographic information system work that's really important, it does help to work with other people to talk about your ideas and the things that you're hoping to produce. So we can if you're interested in doing that, I'm happy to actually add you to the group. The other thing though that I wanted to point out is next to my face on the account up there is kind of a grid or a waffle board that gives you access to a whole bunch of other apps. And ArcGIS Online is the general interface that we get right here. But you also have access to a ArcGIS Story Maps app. And it will give you the ability to create a new story map and then starting to add all of your own content in there. The help and the tutorials are built right in on the left-hand side here with all kinds of recommendations about how to get started. So you want to know about those things that are very, very helpful. And let's see. Sometimes when I'm moving stuff around. All right. Yeah, so if we go back to this board here, we also see we've got the Living Atlas, which is one way that you can access a whole bunch of data that you might be interested in. And then a couple of the other things that I have here may also be of interest. Survey 123 is a tool that allows you to create your own survey and gather spatial data. Quick Capture does the same thing. You've got to do a little bit more building, but once you do it, you can go around, for instance, and take pictures and get the geospatial information and add that into a data set that you're maintaining online. And then the dashboards are one of the other things that we've mentioned a few times. I don't have a good dashboard set up in here, but I think I might be able to show you somebody else's. Yeah, I'm just pulling up somebody else's random dashboard. They've got incidents around the world that they're tracking. And all of this comes off of a database that they've saved into their ArcGIS Online account. So you can get maps and graphs and other types of incident information, depending on how you set up your data. So those are some of the tools that you may be interested in working with ArcGIS Online. Any questions? I'm throwing a lot at you right now. Okay. So when we want to create a map, most people today will go and open up Google Maps because people want to explore spatial information in the world. This is the most readily available tool for anybody to access. And Google Maps has some neat things built into it where it allows you to change the different information that's being displayed in your map. And they've added COVID stuff. They have Street View stuff. So you can take a really interesting view of the world. Google Maps has been around for almost 20 years, right? When I was first doing GIS, this kind of stuff wasn't available. And getting maps usually required that you go get a paper map from somewhere, either a government institution or a Rand McNally map. One of the things that I don't mention in my description of jobs is that I was actually a Rand McNally map and travel store bookstore manager in my early 20s. So I sold people maps all the time. And so paper maps were available. Everybody could go find them if you had a place like that that you could go to. But now people don't rely on paper maps for that kind of information. Most people go to Google Maps and they will search for a location and they'll depend on all of the information that Google is providing, including really excellent satellite imagery that might be of interest to you. And then you can also get these really excellent 3D views of locations around the world. So that's the GSD right there for you. This isn't quite the same thing as a geographic information system, though. You can get access to a lot of data that might be helpful for you. And you can also do some of your own mapping in Google Maps. I can click on a point location here, and I can get the actual latitude and longitude coordinates. So I could put that into my own spreadsheet to map that location. But I'm kind of depending on the imagery and other geographic information that Google is making available to be accurate. I can also do things like measure distances. And so I can measure the walking path there very quickly and get that kind of walking distance. You can also do directions and all kinds of other things. You can share these maps, you can print them, you can export them. But they're not quite GIS in the same sense that using standalone GIS software is. It gets a little bit more like a GIS if you go into Google's Your Places, and you can create a map. And when you create a map, you could do something like Bruce's important places. And so I'm going to open that in my maps there. And so you'll see all the places in the world that I've either lived, significant places that I've spent time in, or places that I've traveled to. It's a really quick and easy map for anybody to create. One of the neat things here when you're in Google Maps is that you can change the symbology, you can edit the descriptions, you can add photographs. So one of you, I think it was Laura, was mentioning pop-ups. You can put a ton of information in those pop-ups, and then anybody can add those into Google Maps. So this is one of the solutions that a lot of people use nowadays for quick geospatial projects where they just want to demonstrate information about places in the world that are of interest to them. But again, it's not a standalone GIS. So there are certain things that you can't do with Google information, although they've been adding different features over time. And they now have a whole bunch of different base maps that allow you to do some changes with the cartographic background. So that's all, excuse me. That's all a really quick way for you to do some of your mapping. There are other tools out there that will allow you to create online maps that you can share with people. One of the other important ones is something called OpenStreetMap. And if you are a lot of people that work with open data like to use OpenStreetMap because this is different than data that's vetted from government sources, although a lot of OpenStreetMap data actually does come from municipalities and government institutions. But parts of it come from regular people that have created accounts just like you would for Wikipedia. And so usually these walking paths are not contributed from a local agency. Usually they're contributed by people who have put their own information in. OpenStreetMap is actually pretty cool because you can treat it kind of like a personal GIS, especially if you create your own account and you start adding data to it. The one issue with that is once you've added data to OpenStreetMap, it's always going to exist there. Although sometimes that existence is just an edit record that the thing you've added has been deleted. So that becomes an interesting part of the equation with the OpenStreetMap data. The other thing that happens is that you'll notice that some parts of the world put more data in than others. So I live in Providence, Rhode Island. You'll notice that we actually have tree cover information for the whole state, whereas Massachusetts doesn't have some of that information. One of the earliest things that I did on OpenStreetMap, probably about a decade ago now, is my son's elementary school was mapped in the wrong location and the building footprint wasn't there. So I moved the school over to the right property parcel that it was in, and I mapped out the building footprint to it. So there are all kinds of interesting projects related to OpenStreetMap. And one of the interesting things about OpenStreetMap is I work with a lot of architects and landscape architects and designers and urban planners who are often really interested in building footprints and property parcels. But one of the best places to get building footprints is actually out of the OpenStreetMap data, because there's a lot of that work has been done in OpenStreetMap. So if you can't find building footprints from any other source, this might be one place to get that kind of data. Part of why I'm mentioning this is that in Google Maps and the ArcGIS tools, OpenStreetMap data is available as a base map background for you to map other information on top of. But sometimes you actually want the information directly from OpenStreetMap in your GIS project. And so there are a couple of ways that you can get that data. And one of them is a place called GeoFabric. It's a German firm that makes data available from OpenStreetMap. What they do is they take snapshots of the data and make it available for you to go and download. One of the good things about the US is that you can actually get individual regions, and you can also get individual states. So let's see, yeah, where you can download all of the OpenStreetMap data for any state in the US. So if you're looking for source information for streets and roads, this is often one of the places where you're going to go to for that kind of information, if you're okay with using crowdsourced data. Another really excellent way to get just location information, if you're not finding good location in Google or OpenStreetMap, you can also take a look at what's available in Wikipedia. And so I'm going to look for Rhode Island here. Wikipedia has a project called GeoHack for any location, or for most locations, they'll have coordinates. And if you click on those coordinates there, you'll get the coordinates in something called degrees, minutes, and seconds, or in decimal degrees. And you can also open up that location in any of these other map services that are available. So this is sometimes an interesting place for people to go and look for data. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because I actually really want to show you some stuff in ArcGIS Pro, and then how to use some of the software as a service tools. But I do want to make sure that you do know about QGIS. QGIS is open source GIS software, especially for those of you who are on Macs. It's free to download and use. Anybody can get access to it. So you can click download now, and then it will install the software. One of the things, it will download the installation files, and then you'll have to install the software. One of the really important things that I like to point out to people is that there's a ton of excellent documentation with the software. The user guide is good, and then there's a training manual, and the gentle introduction to GIS is all very helpful right there. So if you do decide to use QGIS, I definitely recommend taking a look at the documentation. One of the other things I'll mention about that is when I first started using ArcGIS software more than 20 years ago, actually almost 30 years ago, the documentation I thought was really awful. And a lot of the documentation for complicated software was bad for a long time. And now, though, people have whole careers on providing tutorial and software documentation. And so it's been highly professionalized, and the pedagogical approaches are much improved over what existed in the past. And one of the things that you really need to be aware of with the Esri software in particular is they have, let's see, a whole bunch of learning experiences that you can use to learn how to use Esri software in different ways. And they also have this Esri Academy in here. So you can find all kinds of different ways to get training and to get to learn how to use Esri software in the way that you'd like to use it. Some of these tools actually have a lot of application for the open source software. And the other thing you can do is you can look for the YouTube channels that have various tutorials. Am I logged into my account? Yeah, my son's been watching stuff. So Esri actually has its own channel, and you can now go to channels like this and get all kinds of tutorials and discussions on how to use different data sets. And so if your method of learning is very oriented towards tutorials that are in video format, this is a really excellent place for you to go and take a look at what's available. So keep those in mind. So the next thing I want to do is I want to run you through, there was one other thing I was going to do before I opened up ArcGIS Pro with you. And that was to take a look at one other area of data that you need to be aware of. So it used to be that data was more difficult to get. But data has increasingly become available via open data portals. So one of the things that you want to do when you're looking for data for a project is it's quite possible that either the state or the municipality that you're working in has a whole bunch of GIS data that they're making available publicly. So in Massachusetts, where the GSD is, there is Mass GIS, which is the geographic information system for all of Massachusetts. And you can download a whole bunch of different data for the state here. For the US, there is also the National Atlas, which makes a whole bunch of data available. Let's see, there's a whole bunch of different ways to get to it, but it's also probably useful to go in and take a look at some of the paper documentation there. But a lot of the data from the National Atlas is available in the Earth Explorer that I've got in that list of links that you can use. One of the things that you need to know about when you're using this website, though, is some of the data you do need to have a login for it. And you should create that login either, there are a couple of different ways to create it. Usually just a regular Gmail account or Outlook should be fine. There is some data that's restricted. So often I actually recommend that people create it with an academic account so that they get full access to everything. There's a lot of imagery that's available here. And some of that imagery you can also get access to via ArcGIS's living apps, and I'm going to go to that in just a minute and show you some ways to get access to that imagery right in the ArcGIS software. That data, I showed you the state and national level stuff, but frequently there are open data portals for municipalities. And in this case, nope, that's not the one. That's, yeah. You can actually get a ton of map data and different applications for specific cities. So in this case, you can either look at their map gallery or some of their 3D mapping directly with their city viewer, or you can go to their data downloads and download their data directly for use in your project. So these are all different ways in which you can find data and access it and use it. And we'll show you a little bit more of that in just a second. So I'm going to keep that page open, but the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open up ArcGIS Pro, and we're going to use that a little bit. I'm going to show you a couple of ways in which you can bring data into ArcGIS Pro. Since we only have a couple of people with the software installed at the moment, I'm not going to be as aggressive about saying click this button here, but the goal is more to show you how to accomplish some of what you might be interested in doing. When I'm going to share my whole screen, and you'll see some of the websites that I've got open, and I'm going to go down and I'm going to open my ArcGIS Pro application. I've got it in my taskbar, but you may actually have to go and search for it by looking for Esri in your start bar here, or ArcGIS. So ArcGIS Pro. And one of the quick ways to look for it, you can do this, just typing it in your start bar, pulling up your app. So if you've had any experience with ArcGIS Desktop, the ArcGIS Pro software looks a little bit different from that software. And the start page is a little bit more expressive. It has a ton of information in it. And one thing that you'll see is that I actually have a login up in the upper right-hand side, which is my logging into my ArcGIS Online account. And so if you've got the software open, you want to make sure that you're logged into that account. Otherwise, they'll usually time out in less than 24 hours. So you want to make sure that you're signed into that. Some other things to take a look at here is they've got a whole bunch of different resources that you might use for getting help with ArcGIS. So they've got what's new, a quick start guide, and that Learn ArcGIS that I mentioned earlier, but this is actually the right link that I was looking for, with a gallery for how to use all of their tools. Most of the tutorials here are free for anybody to use that's got access to software. So I definitely recommend taking a look and exploring that stuff. The quick start guide will get you started quickly on creating a project. And then you've got some other things down below: discovery paths, learning the basics, mapping and visualization. You should definitely take a look at that. So what I'm going to do first is, most of us are interested in creating a map. So the default is to create a map project in ArcGIS Pro. So you can start without it, or you can use one of the other tools. But I'm just going to create a map. I'm going to let it do a default name for the project, but you could actually do climate justice design fellow 20, let's do that, 2022. And it's going to save it into my documents folder. I recommend going with the defaults when you first start using the software. Trying to save online to a OneDrive or a SharePoint sometimes causes problems with GIS. I would also tend to stick to short but descriptive names that make sense to you. And I'm going to hit OK here. So I've got a few things that are going to open up here that you might not see initially. And you'll see that when you first open up your project, you have a general map of the world. This map uses a default base map. So when you open up the software, what you want to take a look at is you've got a whole bunch of menu items up at the top. It looks like typical Microsoft ribbons that you might see in Microsoft Word or Excel. And so they're actually kind of dynamic. When you're doing a particular thing, the ribbon will sometimes change on you. So you need to keep an eye on that, especially if you're looking for a particular tool to work in a particular way. This will make more sense as you're working with the software more frequently. But I want to point out a couple of really important things. Save your project frequently. And sometimes you want to save your project to another location. You also have a whole bunch of different panes in your project that have your primary information. So the central one is usually going to be your map or your layout. The one in the upper left here is your table of contents, which has all the data that you're mapping. The catalog down in the lower left has where all of your items in your project are. And then over on the right-hand side will often be your geoprocessing menu. Sometimes that will disappear, but you can always bring these items back by going and looking for inserting different types of objects. And also you go to the view pane here. You can reset your panes. If any of them disappear, you can make sure your catalog pane comes back and your geoprocessing. So if I was to close this guy right here, I can go back and click on geoprocessing and that will show up again. So I've got this world map here. In the catalog, you can see where your map objects live, your layouts if you create one, the database for the project where all of your data will end up living, especially if you're producing new products, and a couple other things that are helpful. The folders down here will navigate very similar to Windows Explorer. This is an important thing to know because some GIS data looks very different when you're looking at it in Windows Explorer, but will look like proper GIS data objects in the ArcGIS catalog here. So I've got this initial map of the world, and I can zoom in, and we can actually take a look at Cambridge, for instance. And I can decide I want to change the scale for that. So I can give it a 1 to 40,000 scale for Cambridge. Or if we want to be really close to the GSD, we can do a 1 to 10,000 scale. And then we could decide that that's enough information for us, and we want to actually create a map layout. So what you would do is go to layout, and you would pick the paper size that you're interested in. And so this is interesting because a lot of people aren't doing this part anymore. Frequently, people aren't creating layouts that they're going to end up putting a map frame object into, like this. And so that's an initial 1 to 10,000 map of the GSD area on an 8.5 by 11 page. What people are often interested in doing is working with their map data in a map here, and then going up to the share item up here and sharing their map data to a web map. And that web map will be something that you could then end up looking at in ArcGIS Online. And you could actually share this with anybody if you make it publicly accessible to the world. And so one of the ways in which you could do that is you could create the map you're trying to create here, adding your own map layers, and then you go to share and you share your web map, or you might just want to publish an individual layer of data. This can be a little bit confusing initially, and part of what you want to do is you want to start thinking about what kind of data you want to represent and how you want to represent it first. You want to think about doing a static map that's going to go into a print publication, or are you going to create a dynamic map that's going to end up living online, like something that would end up being produced here. The other thing that's a little bit confusing is that everything that I've already done right here, which isn't all that much in ArcGIS Pro, I can do in ArcGIS Online. I can get that same kind of base map information and add different objects to it. So let me pause for just a minute here and ask, I know that not everybody's installed the software already, but have any of you created the ArcGIS Online account and tried to open up ArcGIS Online Maps?
I do this for work, so, but I have not done the Harvard one yet.
Okay. And so have you created a map in ArcGIS Pro and then saved it to ArcGIS Online?
Yes.
Okay.
And so I've actually used field maps before. So we did like a big tree inventory. So we created a survey in field maps and used that, and then brought that all into field map or into GIS Online. And so lots of, I guess, circular using in the different apps.
So with that data that you captured in field maps, did you also then bring it into ArcGIS Pro and work with it?
We really didn't use it in Pro.
Okay.
Or did we? I don't remember.
So part of the reason for that question is that one of the things that we can do now is that you can move back and forth between using data in an online context and in a desktop context. So it used to be that a lot of these types of projects were very siloed from each other, and you would create a data set to be used in one place and use it either with your desktop software or your online software. But now, because of cloud computing, you can put your stuff in the cloud, and then you can open it up in your desktop software or in your cloud applications, which can end up being a little bit confusing until you've done it a few times.
Yeah, I still get annoyed with all of the Esri itself. I find it's just like far too complicated than it needs to be. So I'm the account manager for all of our accounts, and so just like going between Esri accounts and then ArcGIS Online drives me nuts. But I'm wondering with the for ArcGIS Online, how much like space do we have in our content, like our personal content section, I guess?
It's pretty, I don't want to say unlimited,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
the Harvard license for the S3 products is very wide open.
Okay.
And that's a similar issue with the tokens. So there are some geospatial
Yeah.
analysis things that you can do that even though you're given a certain number of credits, you can actually get far more
Okay.
if necessary for the project. So for a few of the students that are working on these projects that are national, for instance, or cover a very big state like California, it may be entirely possible to do some of that work online, especially when it comes to connecting to the glue projects that you're working on. So there may be ways in which you can take advantage of both the S3 processing credits that we have and the glue prod credits in order to accomplish the tasks that you're trying to accomplish. Yeah.
Awesome.
Jay, did you have a question as well? No. Okay.
I haven't logged on. I'm also dual meeting right now, so sorry.
Sounds good.
I'm listening, but no, I haven't logged in yet. So I'm gonna definitely come back and I'll probably have questions and
Okay.
use YouTube University when I need it.
YouTube University is excellent. That's a big part of the work that I do is showing people where to find all the ways to get help is very important because we work in a nonlinear world at this point. So another thing that I was gonna show you all with regard to the projects in ArcGIS Pro, you can save your projects and work on your projects in ways that are very similar to what you would do with any traditional computer project, where you are going and saving everything onto your local system. And so the S3 projects that I've got, they exist all in my local computer. And when I'm doing certain types of analyses and projects, I want to be able to store my projects and all my data in a place that I want to use them. And so traditionally, with an ArcGIS project, I would do something that's very similar to what you see here, where you have this thing called an APRX, which is the project file for ArcGIS Pro. The toolbox is where you have the different types of tools that you're working with. The GDB is the geodatabase that has all of your geospatial data that lives on your computer. And when I create a project, I would usually also create a couple of other things in this project folder. One might be a source data folder that would be data that I'm downloading from some other location. Another thing that I would often do is have a text document that would be a README that would have notes and description on everything that I'm doing in my project, separate from how ArcGIS can manage that stuff. So this is what a typical project folder would look like. But when you're working with ArcGIS Pro, you can actually save a lot of your data and even toolboxes and other things into your ArcGIS Online account. So whether or not it's on your desktop or in ArcGIS Online is less and less of an issue. You can make choices in both directions there. And so I'm gonna share ArcGIS. I'm gonna share my desktop again in general. And we're gonna take a look at ArcGIS Online. And so the reason I'm telling you about this is that we can go take a look at the ArcGIS Online portal. And I can see all of my data and my maps that I've created in this portal. And let's see if I have, I created a walkshed, let's see, in ArcGIS Online, and I can bring it into my map in ArcGIS Pro. So in ArcGIS Online, there's actually an analysis tool that lets you do network distances. Some of those network distances can be driving, but in this particular case, I did walking time. So I wanted to do 5, 10, 15, and 30 minutes from the Graduate School of Design. I created that data set in the ArcGIS Online tool. But now what I've done is I'm looking for it over the network and bringing it into a map that I'm creating in ArcGIS Pro on my desktop software. So if I go and take a look at the properties for this data set, and I look at the metadata, I can see the information for that. Oh, I had to click one more down. So let me go look at the properties here. And I can see where that data is sourced from. This data is actually coming into my project from a URL. And so you can get all of the information on where that data is coming from there. So this is an important thing to know about and to be able to do, in that you could create data that is being shared from your ArcGIS Online account that anybody with the appropriate URL can access. And there are ways for you to make this data accessible to other applications as well. I'm not a big expert on it, but if you're doing these GLUE projects, you may find that there is a way to tie some of your geospatial layers from ArcGIS Online into those projects as well. And so this is a really quick and interesting way to do that. Another thing here with the ArcGIS Online stuff, and this goes back to what I started our conversation on with regard to finding data, is that you can find a whole bunch of data from Esri's Living Atlas on here. And I'm actually going to go and open Living Atlas on the web browser. And we're going to see that we have a ton of data that is available via Esri. A lot of this stuff is available from various government agencies. So you can check to see whether or not it's authoritative data. It's available publicly in the Living Atlas, and it's managed by Esri Demographics. It has a whole bunch of metadata about where it's coming from, and it tells you what the different spatial layers are that are available for that data. And there are a whole bunch of different ways that you could open this data. We can open it in a map viewer, in a scene viewer, which is a 3-dimensional scene. We can open it in ArcGIS Desktop or Pro. We can export the data as a whole bunch of different file formats. The comma separated values, the KML, the XL, so you've got a bunch of choices there. You can share the link with people. and you can take a look at the individual metadata for that. So if we open it up in a map viewer, this is a map that we can start creating immediately with that demographic variable. And if we zoom in with that data, we can see that different spatial layers become available to us as we zoom in. And of course, when we zoom really far in, we can get census tract data. The cool thing when I open this up in Map Viewer here is I could actually add additional data sets here, or I could save this as my own map. And if I save it as my own map, I can then also open it up in ArcGIS Pro, or I can go to that individual data, and I'm going to click on Open in ArcGIS Desktop. And when we do that, we can see that there's this P item X file. If we double click on that, it's going to open up another instance of ArcGIS Pro for us, which I may not actually want to open, but it's a default behavior. It tends not to open it in the window that you've currently got open with the project. But I'm going to show you kind of a neat little trick here. Once it's opened that data there, I can go and take a look at my other project that I have. And I can grab that ACS data there, and I can drag and drop it into the other project. And now I've got this data that is American Community Survey demographic data for the US at a number of different scales, mapping out household income in the past 12 months that I've brought into my project. I can decide that I want to change the drawing order of that so that it's underneath my walkable areas. Sometimes the drawing order is stubborn. There we go. So I've got those walkable distances. Another thing, turn that off for the moment. We can go to appearance for that layer, and we could change the transparency. And so now you can actually see some of the street level detail there with that demographic information. We can put our reachable streets, change the symbology from that if we wanted to. So we've got a couple of different layers going on here. We've got the, let me turn these off and on slowly so you can get a sense for what's going on in the map. We've got a base map layer that is this world topography and hillshade that has general location information that we might be interested in. We might actually not be interested in using that as the base map. You might decide that you want to use any one of these other base maps. I believe there was a period when they didn't overlap, but any base map you use in the desktop application should also work in the online application if you create something. And when you use these base maps, sometimes it's really useful to change to a different base map because maybe you don't want a ton of the other information, but you want basic streets and you want general location information on there. You can decide which layers you want visible. So we can switch that symbology around. And then we can turn our median household income data back on. And right now it's showing tract level data. We may also decide that we want to change some of the information on how that is being represented. So we've got appearance and labeling up here. We've got some additional information on the data. And we should be able to change the symbology as well. And we have a whole bunch of different choices that we can make with regard to the symbology for the median household data. And frequently when you're doing a choropleth map, you want the graduated colors. And you can see that you have a whole bunch of other variables available in that data that's served over the internet. So even though we brought it in mapping one particular variable, we may decide that we want to use some other demographic variable that's made available in this data set here. So frequently, or frequently isn't the right word, often what happens with people when they're working with this demographic data is they're going to do a little bit of exploration of the demographic variables that they're interested in using from the US Census Bureau before pulling the data into their project and displaying, representing. But one of the reasons I want to show this is a couple of you are working with statewide data, for instance, and you may have something like the Superfund sites or hazardous waste sites or something like that, that you have really excellent mapping information for, and you're interested in bringing in additional demographic variables, but you may not be an expert with census data, or you may not want to spend a ton of time going directly to the Census Bureau and digging through all the different variables that they have. And you may find that what you need is actually available for you immediately via Living Atlas and Esri's ArcGIS online tools. And another part of that is that if it is available over the network like that, you can immediately pull it into ArcGIS online projects and into story maps and into dashboards that Esri allows you to create. So you get access to a whole bunch of different ways that you can use that data without having to develop super granular expertise. Though I waver a little bit on that, because I think sometimes you really need to understand the nitty-gritty of whatever data you're using to understand the problem that you're looking at, or properly describe it in a narrative way. But sometimes you also just need to be able to explore data as readily as you possibly can before you fully can engage with those stories and those analyses. Yeah. So let me just pause for just a second. And I know I'm going through a whole bunch of different stuff very quickly, and I'm not saying click here to do this or click here to do that. But again, as I said earlier, my biggest interest is to make sure you know all the different things that are possible for you to do, and how to kind of think about exploring that stuff before you actually get to the point where you're building individual projects. I know Laura is the only fellow currently still with us this afternoon, but I'll just pause for a moment to see if you have a question or two.
I have one technical question and then one that's a little more broad. I guess the technical one, so when you saved the Living Atlas map and you opened it in Pro.
Yeah.
So does that essentially create more of a link, or is it actually saved? It's a link?
It's just creating a link. It's
yeah.
Just,
so if you were offline, would it not work?
In your saved project, it should still be available in the view that you're in.
Okay. Yeah.
This is definitely an issue that I get a little bit concerned about when people are building standalone projects, and that especially if you're building the stuff that you want to live online so that other people can access it, we have to recognize that we're dependent on the internet resources that are available to us, and that some of these things that we create might stop working if people don't have adequate access to the internet. So one of the recommendations that I frequently give to people is build small examples first. Figure out what works really efficiently with a smaller product and project, and then scale up to something more complicated and more difficult to do. One of the other pieces to that is frequently people will try and find like 10 or 12 different base layers that they're going to use from a municipality to create that map, when all they might really need is the base layers that Esri already provides, or just having OpenStreetMap as a background, and then using point locations or building footprints or property parcels as that one layer that's really the analysis or presentation that you are most concerned with. I think one of the things that's used a lot in the film industry is storyboarding. And I think a lot of architects actually do it too, where you're trying to figure out how to tell that story first, and then you go back and figure out what all the requirements are. I think that that's a really useful exercise with the GIS software. One other thing I'll point out with that, though, is it used to be really difficult in ArcGIS desktop to do multiple maps. You'd have to create a brand new project every time you wanted to create a new map or a site situation. And I'll share ArcGIS here for a second again, so that you can see something that's really cool. I've got this one initial map that I have, and I'm going to go into the catalog and I'm going to look at my project, and I'm going to see that I have one map here. I'm going to copy this map, and in my maps, I'm going to paste it, and I'm going to double click and open that. And I'm going to decide that this particular map is my 1 to 50,000 map. So all of a sudden, I have the same site location, and it's because I like even numbers. That's my 1 to 150,000 scale map right there. That's my 1 to 50,000 scale map right there. Same location. I can do the same thing with layouts, and you could decide, and so I've got this one layout here. I might want to create a new layout that is a different orientation or a different page size, and be able to dump both of those maps in there. So I've worked with a lot of people in the past couple of years that refuse to use to move to ArcGIS Pro. And when they tell me that, this is one of my go-to examples to say, hey, you should really take a look at this thing you can do now, where you can create multiple map views and multiple scene views, and then multiple layouts, and mix and match all of them and have that all available at your fingertips, rather than having to go create a brand new project for each of these different products that you're trying to produce. The other thing that's kind of interesting about this is that when you do this kind of a project in ArcGIS Pro, where you're looking at multiple scales, it can help you think about what your online product might look like if you've got people that may be zooming in and out of multiple data layers to get a sense of the site location that they're interested in. This is a really excellent way to do some of that exploration ahead of time. Now, was that, did I get to both of your questions, or did you have another one?
So actually I was just gonna ask, do you have an example of an interactive like dashboard or map that you could share that was either created in Pro or partially created in Pro, or I guess be interested. I don't know what is possible yet still, I guess, you know, and I can't figure it out myself without seeing it visually.
So yeah, here just a second. Then, this is one of the projects I'm meant to have is linked immediately. So I can't claim authorship of this project, but a couple of years ago, I worked with a GSD student in Kandy who did a story map for Harlem. And so this is very much, it's the African American Design Nexus, which is a project of the Francis Loeb Library. And it is a narrative project. It's a digital humanities project, but it's got mapping elements associated to it. And so she took some historical maps and added some additional demographic information in order to explore those older historical maps. But she also created some other interesting objects in ArcGIS Pro, where she got the building footprints and extruded them and created a 3D map scene of this portion of Harlem. And so you can actually see the really important projects that were designed by Black architects in Harlem. It's not a perfect project, but Tanya went from having some basic 2D GIS skills and kind of a design background to building something that had 3D visualization and distinction of different 3D data that she built in ArcGIS Pro, and then moved that into the ArcGIS Online account, and then put it into a story map. And so this is really, I think in many ways, this is really an excellent example of taking and this is kind of, we met a lot over the course of her generating this product to say, hey, how many different types of geographic information can we bring into this discussion? What would make it really worthwhile for us to demonstrate a 3D scene? And how about we overlay some historical maps? And so in many ways, this was an exploratory project, but bringing in all kinds of interesting data about Harlem. And I'd love for us to explore this again and do even more development of the project. But she's got the 3D map at the beginning. She's got some photographs. She's got some videos. I think there's a sound file in here as well. So I think that this is actually a really excellent example of, I think, what you're looking for, which is, hey, I haven't seen anybody else do this kind of thing where you're taking all this different type of multimedia and mapping material. Yeah, thank you, Jill. Yeah.
Sure.
So that's a good demonstration of that kind of work.
thanks.
The
Yeah.
S3 also does have let's see, am I still sharing? Okay, stop. Has a site where there are a whole bunch of story map examples. Let's see, story maps gallery. That's right. Yeah. recommend taking a look at that because you can see all kinds of different links for that. And S3, I think there's a dashboard gallery as well. The most famous, well, yeah, I guess it's the most famous dashboard gallery, is the Johns Hopkins coronavirus dashboard. This has a ton of information in it to look at really rapidly. So general kind of summary information, and then point location information, and weekly and doses, deaths, cases, all that kind of stuff. This kind of thing is also really popular with people that do emergency management and E911 incidents. So when I worked with the nonprofit, the Providence Plan, one of our contracts is with the Providence Police Department to map out E911 incidents, and I would frequently have to create these kinds of graphics on a weekly basis in a static form. And now you just make sure that your data is properly formatted and in a geospatial format where you can create a map, and you can create all these secondary graphs and summary data as well. So I would definitely recommend taking a look at the gallery for the dashboards to get a sense for what's available there. So the other thing that I wanted to show you in ArcGIS Pro, there are a couple of other things that are worth showing in there. I didn't go into detail on how to create some of the different layers, but you have a whole bunch of editing options available to you in ArcGIS Pro. They now have some excellent tools for setting up the appearance of the different layers, and they've got different ways of working with the data. They've also added in some chart creation stuff, but also this data engineering part that I actually haven't spent a lot of time with, but it may overlap a little bit with some of the glue stuff that you're doing. And the glue stuff might also take advantage of different types of data joining. So that might be one of the things that fellows are going to run into, is making sure that they're able to join spatial data to some other kind of tabular data. So that may become important. There are also some detailed infographics that you can generate directly with Esri. Some of those tools are the same types of tools that they have in their business analyst and community analyst software that's available online. So some of these things you can also do in the online software rather than coming into the desktop software. There are also a whole bunch of built-in modeling tools that may be of interest to folks. Some of the network analyst stuff that I kind of demonstrated with that that watershed that I showed. I will actually show you the watershed in ArcGIS. Gonna open Viewer Classic. And so in Map Viewer Classic in ArcGIS Online, I can go in and find a location that I'm interested in. I'm just visually looking for Gund Hall. Let's see if that's there. Yeah. I could actually create my own point location here. So I'm going to a little bit. Got my base map, and I'm going to look for add a map node and my site. And it's just going to use the default map nodes. And I'm going to click a location out here. Work site, for instance. And I can put some additional notes. I can put the URL in, and I'm not going to. Put close here. And I now have a location where I've manually put a point in. I can save my map. Test site. Site. Works. Testing with site location. So it wants you to fill in some of this information. And it's going to save it in my ArcGIS Online folder. I could have created like teaching folder or something like that. And now I have a base map with a point location on it. And I can go and I can look at these analysis tools. And the analysis tools, the proximity thing that I did for the walkshed is finding the nearest. Let's go back out actually, not finding the nearest, it's create drive time areas. And I don't actually want a drive time, I want a walking time. So I can choose walking distance. And 5 minutes out, I could actually put in some other units there. And I can make a couple other choices about that analysis. And I can include reachable streets. And I can hit run analysis. So this one actually takes up some of your credits. It shouldn't be a lot if it's a single point like that. So you can do the same thing in ArcGIS desktop, but the setting the parameters is more complicated. So it's actually easier to do some of these types of analysis directly in ArcGIS Online. And one of the things that I love is to actually have a toolbar that tells me how long it's going to take. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time, but while it's running, it looks like it actually just finished. I want to point out all of the other types of summary and analysis things that you can create here. The view sheds might be interesting for people, creating watersheds, finding centroids, so all the location stuff. Data enrichment will actually bring in census data and other demographic information that might be of use. Analyzing different patterns, so getting the heat maps that were mentioned earlier. This would be a quick way to do some of that heat map stuff. You can do that right in ArcGIS Pro, but you can do it here in ArcGIS Online as well. So creating that walking distance layer was actually super quick. It probably wouldn't have been much faster to do it in my own desktop machine than it was there. And if we take a look, I'm gonna save that map. And I'm gonna go to my content. And they've added some features. Cool. So that test site map that I created is right here, and the new layer is here. If I click on that, we'll actually see that I can add that layer into a whole bunch of different projects in a very similar way to the other data that I grabbed from ArcGIS Online from the American Community Survey. And so I could actually build out some of the metadata and descriptions, and I could make it shareable to the world if I wanted to. So this is part of the goal of, I think, many of the fellows projects, is making what you're producing available to the wider community that the projects revolve around. And so if you can make the data shareable in this way, you can definitely embed it in other types of projects, and should feasibly be able to bring it into some of the glue projects as well. I'm not quite sure about the API interfaces for doing that, but should be possible. So we've got 4 minutes. Maybe I should ask whether or not there are any last questions, but also offer, I am available for consultations, and I'm happy to help people with individual projects. And there's a lot to cover. I didn't just want to go into, this is basic GIS, this is how you work with points, lines, and polygons. I thought it would be more effective to actually show a lot of the newer online tools and capabilities that are available with ArcGIS Online Pro.
Yeah, that was super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's great. It also gives us a sense. We're gonna do the glue demo in a week or two, and I think we're also working on how we can bring the two together, also with the kind of data that Google has and the data that Google doesn't have, but just kind of figuring out how this constellation can work, and imagining that it's specific to each project. So this has been a great overview. Thank you. It's been super helpful. And yeah, obviously, as people dive into it, questions will arise. So we'll make the recording available, and we'll let you go back to vacation, and we'll follow up later with everything. But thank you so much. It's been awesome.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And hopefully talk to all of you soon.
Yes, exactly. Great. Thanks so much, Bruce. Thank you, Laura, and Diana and Sophie. It's been great to see you. All right. Take care.
Have a good evening.
You
Bye.
too. Bye.